The world is in a tailspin. Things are changing on a daily basis. And although I don't have any clue what's going to happen a month, a week, a few days from now, I do know that I have to find a way to keep doing business, a way to drive sales amidst the rising tide of uncertainty, volatility, and stress. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Mucha Mlingo. I am an EQ fanatic, and I'm part of a global network called 6 Seconds that is really all about empowering individuals to utilize emotional intelligence to thrive. And we find ourselves in a situation where thrive we must, regardless of the stresses around us. Thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, this is part of a series of webinars, EQ in Crisis, how to leverage emotional intelligence in this time that we find ourselves. If this is the first of the series that you have joined, you're very welcome. And if you follow our social media pages, you will find links to the other three. And if you have been with us over the last 4 weeks, welcome again. It's very good to have you here. So, as I mentioned, today we're talking about driving sales. And we're looking at driving sales in an environment of crisis. So how exactly do we do that? And that's really what we're going to be discussing today. As I mentioned, I'm part of a network called 6 Seconds. 6 Seconds is a global nonprofit network practicing and sharing the learnable, measurable, scientific skill of emotional intelligence. Founded in 1997, 6 Seconds is the first and largest organization 100% dedicated to the development of emotional intelligence. I run a boutique consultancy called PTS Africa, and we are a 6 Seconds preferred partner here in the East Africa region. We're part of a global mission to have 1 billion people practicing emotional intelligence. I call myself a fanatic because I am in love with all things emotional intelligence. I genuinely believe that emotional intelligence is a skill that will enable us to navigate life and to thrive. And I am passionate about sharing emotional intelligence across the African continent. So the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, continues to extend its tentacles. More than 175 countries and territories have reported cases. As of the 30th of March, statistics were more than 735,000 cases and 35,000 deaths. Some geographies have a handful of cases, others with early community transmission have a few hundred, and those with uncontrolled widespread transmission have tens of thousands. And governments have launched unprecedented public health and economic responses, and the situation evolves by the day. These are extremely difficult times. And what's making it even more difficult for all of us is that these are uncharted waters, waters filled with speculation and self-appointed gurus who share what they think will happen next. And there are a lot of presumptive forecasts, leaving a lot of us who are in business, those of us who are in sales, unclear about what we should or shouldn't be doing. Today, I'd like to just explore this idea of driving sales, but looking at it from the context or the lens of emotional intelligence. What does all of what's happening across the globe mean for our business? What does all of this mean for the sales that we are supposed to make? What does all of this mean for those of us who run consultancies, those of us who are SMEs? What does this all mean? Now, as I said, I'd like to share my game plan with you. And the reality is I don't claim to have all the answers. We have never been this way before. But what I know for sure is that doing nothing is a recipe for disaster. And so I am convinced that there are some ways that we can look at this landscape that we find ourselves in and map a way forward. I really love this quotation by Idowu Koyenikan. When you do things in the present that you can see, you are shaping the future that you are yet to see. We don't know what the future holds. As a matter of fact, here in Kenya, we really are uncertain how long will this situation that we are in continue. There is a lot of uncertainty, and with that uncertainty comes a lot of fear. But what I do know is I can focus on the things that I can control. And those are the things that I can focus my attention on as I look to drive my business forward. Before we jump right in and get to the nitty gritty of why we are here this morning, let's take a moment to check in. So, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to find a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper, I'd like you to separate it into 3 columns. So quickly find a piece of paper, and if you're joining us for the first time, this webinar always has some interactive activities where I'd like you to reflect and think about what you're going through, because that's really what's at the heart of emotional intelligence. So get a piece of paper as we check in, and I'd like you to split it into 3 sections. Label the left column thoughts, label the middle column feelings, and label the column on the right actions. So if you have a look at my screen, you will see something similar to what I'd like you to do. On your sheet of paper, thoughts, left column, feelings, middle column, and on the right column, write down actions. And I'd like you to take a moment to think about your thoughts and feelings over the last 1 week. Your thoughts and feelings over the last 1 week. So in the column on the left, write down each emotion that comes to mind. Take your time and write it down. Emotions come in multiples, so write down everything that you have felt. In the middle column, I'd like you to write down what you have been thinking. What thoughts have been running through your mind? Again, dump it all. No judgment. And in the column on the right, what has your behavior looked like? How are your thoughts and feelings showing up? So this is an exercise where we're exploring your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. I've asked you the question in that order, but there's no need for you to answer it in that order, which is why on the screen I've shared all 3 of them together. You can take each column in whatever order you like, whatever jumps out at you first. But ultimately, I'd like us to spend a couple of minutes thinking through this. What have your actions been over the last week? How have you been feeling over the last week? And what thoughts have been running through your mind? And as you write that down, go deeper. Dig beyond the surface. Go to another level. What else have you been feeling? What else have you been thinking? How else have you been behaving? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to just work on this exercise. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? And what are your actions? One more minute. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? And what are your actions? And if you'd like to extend it past the last week, that's perfectly fine. What I'd like to know is what have been your overriding thoughts, what have been your overriding feelings, and what have been your overriding actions. How have you been behaving? So one more minute as you complete the exercise. So before we move on, you'll notice on the screen the latter part of the table. Ask some questions that I'd like you to consider. How are your thoughts impacting your feelings and actions? How are your feelings impacting your thoughts and actions? And how are your actions impacting your thoughts and feelings? Because the reality is these three things are intertwined. And so these thoughts, feelings, actions are constantly interacting with each other and constantly impacting each other. So maybe at the underneath what you've written in each of the columns, just answer that question. How do you think your thoughts are impacting your feelings and your actions? How do you think your feelings are impacting your thoughts and your actions? And how do you think your actions are influencing your thoughts and your feelings? And we're going to come back to this activity. We're going to refer back to it as we are wrapping up the discussion that we're having. If you've attended any of the other webinars, or indeed if you've interacted with me before, you will know that I love to say that emotions are data. Emotions give us insight. And often we pay little attention to the insight that our emotions are giving us. The reality is that when we pay attention to this insight, we're able to make more, we are able to make better decisions when we utilize our thoughts and our feelings. And the reality is our thoughts, feelings, and actions are very much intertwined. One thing I forgot to say as we started was that if you have any questions, you're welcome to either post them in the chat um, or you can unmute yourself and you can ask your questions. At the end, I will have a Q&A. I will endeavor to be done with the presentation by 1:45 so that there is enough time for us to answer questions. But obviously, if you have something that you need to ask as we're going along, feel free to do so. And on the call will help me to manage questions coming through on the chat. So feel free to engage as we go along. So let's have a look at some numbers because numbers don't lie. Here is some research that is shared by 6 Seconds in their publication, The Business Case for Emotional Intelligence. At PepsiCo, executives who were selected for EQ competencies generated 10% more productivity. At L'Oreal, individuals who were chosen as a result of scoring higher EQ competencies brought in 2.5 million more sales. And an initiative at Sheraton helped them to increase market share 24%. The reality is that this soft skill of emotional intelligence actually drives bottom line results. This soft skill of emotional intelligence actually drives bottom line results. And so I want us to explore how we can utilize emotional intelligence in this time to drive sales, to drive business. And as I mentioned, or as I've been saying, as far as this webinar is concerned, the idea is that we need to think outside the box. We need to understand that this is a new normal. And the reality is that this pandemic hasn't just changed things now, but this pandemic has changed things going forward. Whereas we may navigate through this season, however long it lasts, and we may go back to the office, it will never be the same. And so we need to figure out, how do we navigate this new normal? As I mentioned when we started, I don't have any idea what's going to happen in the next week, in the next month, 3 months from now. But I do know that I must find a way to keep doing business and driving sales amidst this tide, this rising tide of uncertainty, volatility, and stress. So I have made a decision that I am going to focus on what I can control. The reality is that if I allow myself to take my eyes off what I can control, if I allow myself to focus on the uncertainty, I will surely struggle to thrive in this season. And so, how exactly can we do that? How exactly can we move forward in this time of uncertainty? I'd like to share 3 tips that I have been using to stay connected to my customers and ultimately drive sales. And this is not theory. I'm sharing what I am actually doing right now. As I move to share my 3 tips, let me give you some context. Let me quickly share an overview of the sales cycle, because this will help you to understand why I am utilizing the tips that I am. So this is a model of the sales cycle that we use for our sales training program, The Art of Selling. And this is a simplified version of the sales cycle that has 4 key elements. So the first part of the sales cycle, the first step in this circle, is to build trust. And so the idea here is that you are meeting the clients, you are engaging with the clients, and you are building trust. And at the back of the client's mind, the question that they are asking themselves is, do you have my best interests at heart? So this part of the sales cycle starts from the moment you make a decision to reach out to a particular client, to a particular prospect. And it, goes from all the research that you may do about the organization, about that individual. It goes to how you make an effort to understand their business, to understand their industry, all the way to the first call, the first meeting, everything that you do initially with the prospects. And everything that you do in this stage is all around building trust. And like I said, the question the customer is asking is, do you have my best interests at heart? The second part of this simplified sales cycle is where you now identify the needs that the customer has. And the question that the customer is asking themselves is, can you meet my needs? Can you meet my needs? Or are you going to provide a generic product, a generic service? Can you meet my specific needs? And so the goal of this part of the sales cycle is for the salesperson, for the business owner, to understand the client needs, to identify any challenges or problems that the client is facing, and also to understand what the client's goals are. Because if you know what the client needs, if you know the problems they are facing, and if you have a good understanding of what they're trying to achieve, then you can provide a product or a solution that meets their needs, that solves their problem, and that helps them to achieve their goal. Now, here's the thing. You're not going to be able to identify the client needs if you haven't built trust. If the client doesn't believe that you have their best interests at heart, it becomes very difficult for you to ask the kind of questions that will give you the kind of information that will help you to identify what their needs are, what their problems are, and what they're trying to achieve. And so the sales cycle is circular and the steps build on each other. So where a salesperson is struggling to get information from a customer, is struggling to understand what a customer's needs are, what a customer's problems are, what a customer's goals are, then usually the challenge is they have not built trust. The third part of the sales cycle is now how you provide your solution, your product. And ultimately, the question that the customer is asking themselves is, what value can you provide to me? What value can you provide for me? So the thing here is, now that as a salesperson, now as a business owner, you've understood what the client needs, you have understood the client's pain, the problems, the challenges they're facing, and you've understood the goals that they are trying to achieve, then you position your solution as something that meets needs, as something that will solve problems, as something that will enable the customer to achieve their goals. And you're not able to do that. You're not able to meet identified needs. You're not able to solve identified problems. You're not able to help a customer achieve their goal if you don't know what those three things are, which is why you must invest the time in getting to know the customer. So the identify needs part is what is commonly referred to as KYC, know your customer. And the more you know your customer, the better able you are to position your solution as something that meets their needs, solves their problem, and helps them to achieve their goals. The last part of the sales cycle, after you've closed the sale, is actually what happens next. And this is where a lot of salespeople, a lot of business owners actually fall short because they're so focused on closing the sale. They don't remember that what you want to do is continue in this cycle so that you continue to generate more business. So the last part is provide your customer. And we like to refer to this part of the sales cycle as LYC, love your customer. And what the customer wants to know is, will you be there after the fact? Will you provide after sales support? Is this going to be one of those things where you sell me something and then you ride off into the sunset, never to be seen again? And so this is the cycle, a simplified version of the sales cycle that we use when we're teaching Basic Sales 101. And I'll summarize it very quickly. Obviously, at each stage, there's a lot more going on that I don't necessarily want to go into detail right now because this is not the purpose of today's session. Today, we're talking about how do we make sure that we are still moving along in this cycle, regardless of these circumstances that we find ourselves in. Because that's really the goal, to continue movement, to make sure that somehow we are still moving along this cycle with our existing customers. So the 3 tips that I want to share today are applicable regardless of where you are in the sales cycle with your client. So whether this is someone that you are building trust with, whether you had already reached the stage where you were working to identify their needs, whether you have reached the stage where you're providing a solution, and the reality is there are those of us who are still selling, even in this situation, in this crisis, whether you are providing after sales support, wherever you are, these 3 tips are applicable for you. And the first thing that I will share, the first tip that I will share on how to drive sales in this time of crisis is communication. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Now is the time to stay in touch with your clients. You have heard it said a million times before. People buy from people they trust. People buy from people that they have a relationship with. And whilst building trust is at the first step of the sales cycle, the reality is it is a continuous process. Trust is one of your most valuable commodities in business. And how you communicate with your clients and the market as a whole in this period can help you to cement that trust. So what do I mean by communicate? Well, there's two ways or two things that I would say as far as your communication is concerned. The first is your overall communication. So how you are communicating with your customers and the marketplace as a whole, either via email or probably via social media. What do you want to be known for during this crisis? What is the messaging that you want to put out there? I made a decision that I want to share hope. Things are tough. They really are. We find ourselves in a situation that is hard and it's scary. It is terrifying. It's unsettling. And the reality is, we don't really know what's coming next. There is little I have control over. But this has been my mantra in this season. I can still make a choice and I can focus on the things that I can control. And I choose to be optimistic. I choose to cling to God's word that tells us that joy comes in the morning. I choose to cling to his word that says that he will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. If you were to take a step back and look over your communication over the last 4 to 6 weeks, what is your brand saying? Because at this time, you are going to be known for something. In whatever your networks are, whether your networks are small, whether your networks are large, what is the overall message that you are sharing? And the reality is that if we don't make a conscious decision, you find yourself tossed here and there by your emotions. And that means that the communication you put out there isn't going to be consistent and isn't necessarily going to be intentional. So just reflect for a moment. If you were to look at the last 4 to 6 weeks, what is your brand saying? I'm part of a Bible study, and we've transitioned to our Bible study online. And in our online discussion this week, one of the members shared a testimony, and she says that she felt that God was rebuking her because when she looked at the messaging she's been sharing, and this is not from a business perspective, this is just for her as a person. But when she looked at the messaging that she'd been sharing on WhatsApp, on social media, she realized that she wasn't necessarily sharing hope. She was sharing the doom and the gloom. And she was challenging each of us to really be intentional about what we're putting out there. And I would expand that to your communication as a whole, as a business. What message are you putting out? Regardless of what stage you are with all the different clients that you're working with, as an overall message, what are you saying? And like I said, I made a decision that I want to share hope. Yes, things are tough, but I want to be optimistic. And optimism is a skill, it's a decision that you make. The second thing is, what are you saying to your key clients? So the first thing is, what are you saying overall? So that's just the message that you're putting out there, whether it's via email, whether it's on social media, or wherever it is that you share your thoughts as an organization or as an individual for that matter. The second thing is, what are you saying to your key clients? What is your interaction with your key clients? Whether they are currently buying from you or not, you must stay in touch. You know your clients. You should do. And you should have an understanding of how best to do that. Each client is different. How you stay in touch may be different, but you must stay in touch. You must have a strategy to stay in touch, to remain top of mind and continue building trust. How you communicate, what you say, there isn't really a set formula for that. You know your client, but you must stay in touch. So what I'd like you to do is turn over a page, turn over to the back of where you did the initial exercise. Remember, we said we're coming back to that exercise. So turn over the page And I'd like you to think of your top 3 clients. So we're going to do this exercise for your top 3 clients, but you'll be able to, expand it later in your own time if you want to extend that. But think of who your top 3 clients are and write their names on the piece of paper. For each client, ask yourself, based on your knowledge of them, what is the best way to communicate with them? What is the best way to communicate with them? Remember, your goal isn't necessarily to sell to them right now. They may not be buying. If that opportunity arises, fabulous. If they are buying, fabulous. You could be selling a product or service that your client has need of right now. That is great. But if that's not the case, if you find yourself in a holding pattern, like I have with many of my clients, focus on building trust. How can you do that for each key client? What is the best way to communicate with them? So for some of my clients, that's email. And I've indicated which clients those are. For some of my clients, we're having an ongoing WhatsApp conversation. Other clients, it's a phone call. You know your client. What is the best way to communicate with each one? So I'd like you to take 30 seconds for each key client and ask yourself, what is the best way to stay in touch? We're not going into the nitty-gritty of what you're going to say. We're just thinking at this moment about the methodology. So take a few moments to do that. Okay, so remember, we're focusing on your top 3 clients, and we're going to continue that conversation. At this point, the question I'm asking you is, who are those clients, and how can you intentionally stay in touch with them? Regardless of whether they are buying from you right now, how do you remain top of mind? And then you need to go beyond just communicating. So the second part, the second strategy that I would share with you, a strategy that I am utilizing, is born out of the idea that you are an expert. Provide support to your customers. Help them to see your expertise. Whatever it is that you provide, be it a good or a service, show your customers in this downtime, perhaps, that you are the expert that they need. Even if they can't buy from you right now, help them to see that you still are the expert that they need. A friend of mine runs a beauty spa. Her name is Winnie. And I loved a post that she shared on social media where she was sharing how you can do a scrub at home. You are the expert. How can you show your key customers that? And so Winnie shared this on social media, and she was, giving a very quick demonstration of how you can use, if I'm not mistaken, I think one was flour and the other was sugar, to do a scrub at home. Now that you're not able to come into the spa because they are closed, remaining top of mind, showcasing why you are the expert that you are. So let's go back to your key clients. Let's go back to your key clients, each of the one that you had listed. How would you use your expertise to support each of those clients? How would you use your expertise to support each of those clients? Ask yourself that question. So go back to where you were writing down who your key clients are, where you wrote down how you can communicate with them. Ask yourself, how can you use your expertise to support each client? Regardless of where you are currently on the sales cycle, you have a level of expertise that your client could utilize. Show them. Show them what that looks like. I get that you have a company to run. I do. And I'm not suggesting that you give away or you start giving away things for free and incur unnecessary costs. But I am recommending that you take a step back and think about how you can support your key clients. And remember, this is something we're doing for key clients. It's not necessarily something that you would do for everyone in the market. How can you support your key clients? How can you show them that you're an expert in your field? This requires some strategic thinking, but I am convinced that whether you are currently closing deals or if, like me, in many instances, you have been put in the holding zone, you can show the value that you bring. And you can do that in a cost-effective way. Showcase your value. Right now, show them what it is that you can do. And this is especially important for customers where you had passed the step in the cycle where you have gotten to understand what their needs are, where you've gotten to understand where they are hurting, and when you've gotten to understand what their goals are. If you are armed with that information, your customers' needs, your customers' pains, your customers' goals, use that to showcase value. Doesn't mean you have to give away everything for free, but what can you give away? How can you support them? How can you show value? So go back, as I've said, to the 3 key clients you've indicated. You've written down how you could reach out to them. So what mode works best for that particular client. For each one, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to just think about how you can share value. How can you share value for that particular client? How can you showcase? How can you make yourself an integral part of this process for them? How can you make it a little less painful? How can you take them one step closer to achieving their goal? So a minute to reflect on that and write that down. Okay, great. So the last of the 3 strategies that I would encourage you to utilize, as I have been, is to invest. Invest in yourself. The reality is that you are your greatest asset. And in this season, if you have the time, if things have slowed down for you, invest in you. Sharpen the saw. The reality is that many of us are extremely overwhelmed. So this doesn't have to be something big. The little things. Set yourself some achievable goals and use this downtime wisely. You don't have to find the solution for world peace, but there are little things that you can do on a daily basis that will ultimately have a profound impact. Read a book, attend a webinar, and you can tick that box having interacted in today's session. Do some exercise. Any investment that you make in yourself now will tell in the interaction you have with your client. Remember, we've said that we're staying in touch with our clients. And when we invest in ourselves, we are more confident. We are more energized. We are less anxious. And that helps when we come to closing sales. Everything you do will help to build trust with your customer. So spend time, invest in yourself. And so let me ask you to just take a moment and reflect. What are some of those things that you can do? And the reality is that if we are not intentional, time will pass us by. In the first webinar, when I was talking about emotional well-being in this time of crisis, one of the things I shared was that you need to find some sort of a routine. If you don't plan for it, the reality is these weeks, these days, these hours will just pass into days, and these days will just pass into weeks, and you will look back on this time and wonder where the time went. And so you must be intentional. But like I said, don't get overwhelmed by trying to read 15 books. Just start with one. Don't get overwhelmed by telling yourself you'll exercise for 2 hours every day. Start with one day. Start with 15 minutes. But be intentional, because every moment that you invest in yourself will actually help you to drive sales. Because as you engage with your customer, you will be more confident, you will be more energized, and you will be less anxious. And any time you spend sharpening the saw, whether it's by reading a book or attending webinars or getting a better understanding of your industry, will help you to cement your position as a subject matter expert. So invest in yourself. So what is it that you could do to invest in yourself? How can you use this downtime? I'm doing a lot of reading. I'm attending a few webinars. And I found that it's helping me even as I continue to interact with my clients. What is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is about being smart with our feelings. It's about being more aware. It's about being more intentional, and it's about being more purposeful. More aware, more intentional, more purposeful. Whether you are closing sales or not, you are in the sales cycle. So utilize these 3 strategies to make sure that whatever pace you are moving forward, it may feel as though you're hardly moving, but I assure you, you are. I assure you that if you are in touch with your customers, if you are making sure that you are regularly communicating with them, if you are showcasing yourself and showing the value that you bring, and if you're investing in yourself, you are closing sales, even if you don't actually see it. And you will look back on this time and realize that you were building your business, that you were expanding your pipeline. It may not be visible right now, but it is true. Emotions are an integral part of who we are, and they work automatically and they affect our body and mind. When we started, we did an exercise where we looked at our thoughts, our feelings, and actions. And I shared how tightly intertwined they are. I'd like you, as we conclude, to go back to that sheet of paper where you wrote down your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. I'd like you to go back to that right now. And as we wrap up, so I can allow for some questions, how can you channel your thoughts? If you changed your thoughts, what impact would that have on your feelings and actions? If you changed your thoughts, what impact would that have on your feelings and actions? If you changed your feelings, what impact would that have on your thoughts and actions? And if you changed your actions, what impact would that have on your thoughts and feelings? The reality is our thoughts, feelings, and actions are intertwined. And you can change one. And when you change that one, it has an impact on the others. And so as we wrap up, so that I can take questions, which one can you change? As you look ahead in this season of uncertainty, heightened anxiety, what can you change? Is it your thoughts? Because if you change that, it can have a positive impact on your feelings and actions. Is it your actions? Because if you change that, it can have a positive impact on your thoughts and feelings. Is it your feelings? And we're all different. So what we can change will differ. Some of us are driven by our thoughts, and so we need to change our thoughts in order to change our feelings. Others are driven by action, and so we need to change our action in order to change our feelings. Doesn't matter which one it is. Which one can you change? So as we wrap up, 30 seconds to reflect. What could you change? Your thoughts, your feelings, or your actions? And if you change that, what impact would it have on the others? And how will that help you to drive sales in this season of crisis? At this time, I'd like to open up for questions. As I said, you can unmute yourself and ask your questions, or you can share your questions in the chat box. I encourage sharing in the chat box, not because I don't want you to speak, but because if you ask a question in the chat box that I don't get a chance to get to right now, I'll have that question there and I'll be able to respond to you individually. So I encourage typing in, even if you do share your question, if you unmute yourself and speak, I'd encourage you to type it in as well, because it allows me to come back to you at a later stage if I'm not able to answer all your questions. So please feel free to ask the questions you may have, and I will take those questions. I'll try and get through as many as I can in the 12 minutes that we have remaining. If I don't get to your question, I assure you, I will reach out to you and make sure that I answer it. All right, so we have a question already. Damaris, thank you so much, Damaris, for interacting. How do you build trust online, perhaps for an online-based business, in the face of detractors? Excuse me. Thank you very much, Damaris. That's a really great question. I think that the reality is, whether your business is online or face-to-face, ultimately what cements trust is what is done repeatedly, and it is the actual actions. It's not enough to say something. Your behavior must support what you're saying. So I think what I would do if I'm building trust online is, I think the first step is obviously building the brand and, supporting that brand. If you're selling a particular product and you're making deliveries, making sure that you keep within those timeframes of deliveries, making sure that you communicate with customers when they place the order. So I would say that the first step is make sure that you deliver on whatever it is that you promise. Then the second step is showcase your success stories. So, showcase the customers who have been really happy with the service that you have provided. Let them give you testimonials, because the reality is that, we believe something if we see some evidence of it. So the first thing is make sure that you deliver, make sure you provide whatever it is that you have said you will provide. People believe when they see. So when they see the action, your trust will then grow. And then the second thing is showcase what you're doing. Give testimonials. Get real people to give those testimonials. So share it on your social media. Reach out to your customers and ask them if they're okay with sharing, how happy they are with your service, and then share that. The third thing I would say is, where you drop the ball, fix it. Fix it quickly and fix it loudly. If someone does share that something hasn't quite happened as they wanted, respond to them, fix it. And when you fix it, share that you fix it. A lot of times we're afraid of sharing about the times when we've dropped the ball. It's actually good to share the times you've dropped the ball, as long as you can show how you resolved it. All right, so how you resolved it. So showcase that. And the more you can showcase that, the more believable you are, the more customers feel that, okay, yeah, this person is willing to share that, okay, here we didn't quite do what we should have, but this is how we fixed it. We reached out to the client, for example. I think that those are the three things I would say. So number one, deliver, deliver, deliver. Even when it's an online business, make sure you deliver to your customers. Number two, showcase that you're delivering. Get your customers to talk about your product. And people want real examples. So get your customers to share if they are happy to use their pictures on social media, giving you a testimonial. The more testimonials you can give, the better. The third thing is solve whatever problems that come up and solve them visibly. Share. After you've solved a problem, tell everyone how you solved that problem. Don't be afraid to say how this is how I dropped the ball, but this is how I fixed it. I think that's what I would share in terms of building trust. I can hear someone's unmuted themselves. I'm not sure if they want to ask a question. Please go ahead. I can't hear you. I can see that someone is trying to speak, but for some reason I can't. We can't seem to hear you. Can't seem to hear you. Maybe you can type in the chat box if you are speaking. Thank you very much, Damaris. I'm glad that you appreciated my response. Anyone else with any questions that they would like to ask? Aha, here we go. Michael says adaptability and versatility of a salesperson. What would you advise for working from home? At times, I feel like I'm on leave and find working from home getting harder by the day, finding myself getting lost in the noise and the lack of psych for working, and still back in the company, the target still stands. That's a really great question. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, so I think a number of things I would advise, and this again is based on what I shared in the first webinar where I talked about emotional well-being. So the first thing I would say is have a schedule. When you're working from home, have a schedule. Have a schedule that outlines how you are going to use your time. And because you're working from home, because you don't necessarily have the energy of everyone else that you are feeding off, you're going to have to be the one who infuses energy in yourself. Now, we're all different and we all get energy in different ways. But what you need to do in your schedule is you need to allocate time for building energy and getting psych and motivation. As I said, we're all different. We can do that in different ways. For some, it's reaching out to others. So it may mean that you need to, in your schedule, schedule in time for connecting with others. There are so many ways that we can connect online. Even though we're not able to connect face to face, we can utilize these apps, these tools to connect. You can get your friends together on a Zoom chat and actually have a conversation. In that first webinar, I shared a number of ways that you can connect. And feel free to, follow us on social media and find that webinar if you want more detail. But the point is, schedule in time to connect. If you're the kind of individual who gets energy from others, then you're going to have to make sure that you find that energy by connecting regularly and schedule it in. Because the challenge is when we don't schedule something, we'll forget to do it. So create a schedule, create a planner that says that at this time, this is what I'm going to be working on as far as my work is concerned. These are the deliverables I have. And interspersed with that, schedule in time to connect. Another thing that gives us energy and psych is activity and exercise. So one of the things that you can do is make sure that you schedule time to exercise. And exercise doesn't necessarily mean going into the gym and lifting weights. Exercise is whatever it is that works for you. It could be going out and walking around the compound. It could be going out and walking up and down the stairs, whatever it is. But what we know is that the physical part of us is very much intertwined with the mental and emotional. So we want to keep physical. The challenge with working from home is that we have significantly reduced the amount of activity that we're doing. So you must schedule time for activity. And I say schedule it because if it's not scheduled, it won't get done. So the first thing is create some kind of a schedule, and that schedule will outline how you are going to complete your work. And then within that schedule, put in time for connecting, time for reaching out, and find ingenious ways that you can utilize technology to connect with people so that you can gain energy from them. And then make sure that you schedule time for exercise, schedule time to do something active, whatever it is, because when we are active, it helps us. And then the last thing I would say is, schedule time for reflection. A lot of times the reason why we start feeling low is because we are feeling it and we are not processing it. We are feeling it and we are pushing aside those emotions. We are feeling it and we are dumping. You must actually take time to reflect on what you're feeling. Again, in the first webinar, I encourage writing it down. Write it down, look at it. Emotions are data, they are insight. What are your emotions trying to tell you? All right. I hope I've answered. I have one more question. I see that time is gone. How do you keep it warm with clients who want to peg previous payment to the first, delivering a new order for them to pay you? How do you keep it warm with clients who want to peg previous payment to first delivering a new order for them to pay you? So they're not paying you for a previous order that you have already delivered. I hope I'm understanding that question. I think what you're asking is they are not paying you for previous order and they're saying that the only way they'll pay you is if you do new things. I mean, the reality is that we are in a season where for many of us, we are in holding. So you have to just figure out how can you show value to that customer, even though they've put you in holding. Remember, you don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face. You don't want to react quickly to the way a customer is behaving, even if the customer is behaving badly, if the customer is behaving in a way that really shows a lack of integrity. You need to still showcase value, however hard that may be. So I hope I've answered that question correctly. I think the focus is asking yourself, how can you showcase value? How can you push for what it is that you need from them, but still showcase the value that you bring to the particular customer? So time is quickly fast spent. If you do have a question, please still feel free to share it in the chat box. And like I said, if I'm not able, and time has come to an end, so I may not be able to answer it on this webinar, but I will reach out to you. So if you still have a question, please do share it. Thank you very much to all those who are sharing your feedback. I really appreciate it. I just see a quick question here. How do you ensure the team remains motivated and committed? So we're going to have a webinar that looks at teamwork and motivation. Actually, next week, the webinar is on motivation. So do tune in because obviously I'll be able to share in much more detail. But what I will say now is keep connected. Keep connected. It's really important that we keep connected. Number two, be very clear what the deliverables are. So if we want to keep people motivated and committed, what are the deliverables? And how are we measuring the deliverables? How are we keeping track of the deliverables? So leverage technology to make sure that we are very clear about what is expected. Make sure your team is very clear about what you expect from them, and make sure that you're regularly updating on where people are. All right, so keep connected. Make sure that everyone is clear. And then the third thing is speak to the emotions of the moment. The reality is people cannot leave their emotions at the door. So another way to make sure your team is motivated and committed is speak to the emotions of the day. Create some sort of forum that allows people to share, if necessary, how they feel. Remember, if we ignore our emotions, we ignore them at our peril. It's 10 o'clock. I'd like to release you. Thank you so much for your time. As I've said, if I've not answered your question, I will get to it. Thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. My name is Mucha Mlingo, and I am the founder and lead consultant at PTS Africa. We are a boutique training consultancy firm that helps our clients to leverage emotional intelligence to drive results. We believe that this soft skill actually drives bottom line results. And that's what we are sharing across our social media pages and across the different forums that we utilize. And today I've shared with you my playbook, how I am driving sales in this season of crisis. I truly hope that you have found the session beneficial. Later on today, we will share a link to this webinar online. So if you want to share it with anyone, if you want to listen to it again and go back to any of the different points that I made, you're very welcome to do so. Thank you so much and have a fantastic day. If you'd like to get in touch with us, Follow us on social media. Our social media pages are at PTS Africa, and that's across all platforms. And my social media handle is at Mucha Mlingo across all social media platforms. So do feel free to get in touch, interact with us as we work together to navigate this season of crisis. Thank you so much, and God bless you. Bye.
Bye.